This is a demonstration of problem 345, compute the DuPont disaggregation of return on equity. And the problem tells us to refer to the balance sheet and income statement below for Facebook Inc. So I have copied the information for Facebook's income statement for December 31st, 2018 and selected information from the consolidated balance sheets from 2017 and 2018 that will allow us to compute the ratios for this problem. The first part of the problem states compute return on equity. So before we compute the return on equity, we're going to determine what the average equity is. So we're going to need that for our calculation. So we're going to take our beginning stockholders' equity and our ending stockholders' equity. And we're going to divide that by 2, and that gives us average equity. So now we're going to compute return on equity. Return on equity is equal to net income divided by average equity. So Facebook had a return on equity for 2018 of 27.91%. Now in Part B, it states apply the DuPont disaggregation into return on assets and financial leverage. So to compute return on assets, we first are going to need to know what is the average assets. So we're going to take the beginning assets and the ending for Facebook and divide by 2. And that gives us the average assets. So now we can compute return on assets. So the return on assets is going to be equal to our net income divided by our average assets. And we see that return on assets is 24.32%. And they also asked us to compute the leverage. So for the DuPont disaggregation, the leverage is equal to our average assets divided by our average equity. And we see that financial leverage was 1.418. Now we're going to compute our return on equity using return on assets and financial leverage. So we have our return on assets and we have our leverage, and we can see that we get the same return on equity. And if you notice, Facebook does not have a lot of debt because they have a low financial leverage. So most of their return on equity is coming from the return on assets. So now we're going to disaggregate return on assets into its two components, which is profit margin and asset turnover. So profit margin is equal to net income divided by sales to see how profitable Facebook is. And Facebook is very profitable, 39.6% profit margin. Next, we're going to see the productivity or the asset turnover for Facebook. So we determine that by taking our sales and our average assets. And we see that Facebook has an asset turnover of 0.614%. So the D part states calculate the full DuPont disaggregation. So all three components of the DuPont disaggregation, including the profit margin, the asset turnover, and the financial leverage that we computed here, shows all three components for return on equity for Facebook. And this is the conclusion of problem 345.